Hi, everyone. My name is Maddie McGee. I'm a senior print journalism and magazine emphasis major from Baltimore, Maryland. It is my great pleasure to introduce Jo Packham. She is the creator, editor-in-chief, and 2018 Magazine Launch of the Year winner for Where Women Create, Where Women Cook, Where Women Create Work, and What Women Create magazines.
I just click it on here.
You want me to play the video or whenever? Now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah. Is that too loud? I have a really loud voice. So I'm Jo Packham. I'm sure I'm a name you've probably never heard from a small town that you've never visited, which is Ogden, Utah. And I've been in publishing almost my entire adult life. It's been 43 years now. So this is my series of magazines, and this is Where Women Work, which won Mr. Magazine's Launch of the Year for 2018. That is the augmented reality video that is attached to the cover. So if you download the app and you point your phone towards the cover, then the cover comes to life with that video. And the reason we did that was because I am a traditional print girl who believes in the printed page. We love magazines like everybody here, and we believe in the future of magazines, and we believe that magazines are definitely alive. But we also believe that we have to integrate ourselves a little bit into the world of technology, and you have to understand my audience in that we're targeted towards the small entrepreneur and the craftsperson or the maker, not the fine artist, but the painter and the ceramicist. And this world, my world, is a world that loves print. They love paper because they see it as an art form, and they're not on digital as much as the rest of the world because they would rather be in their studios making their projects or doing what they love to do. They sit down at night with these kinds of magazines. They're heavy paper, they're nice covers. We do not have advertising in our magazines, and I'll go into that in a little while, but they get as much enjoyment of sitting, like Stephen said last night, sitting down, reading their magazine, having a glass of wine, doing the kinds of things they do. So those magazines, I have 4. One is called Where Women Create. It is the story of the artist's studio, where they create what they create and how it works for them and their craft. And then I have What Women Create, which is a pictorial anthology of the passion and the process. It is not a how-to magazine, but it gives you a great deal of insight into what artisans go through to create the pieces that they create. And I think we should all have a nonprofit in our life that we support and give back to. And one of mine is that I would like to educate the world to appreciate the artisan crafter. Because when you go to a craft fair, how many times do you walk through and somebody says, "Oh, I could make that"? Why does she spend so much? Why does she think that's worth so much money? And I think one of the greatest disservices of crafting is whoever brought Indian textiles from India to the rest of the world and charged very minimal amounts of money. Because if you've ever been to India and watched those women and those men create those beautiful fabrics where they sit on their hunches and they sit in these giant rooms and they work 12 hours a day and they sew every single bead on by hand, and they do it without patterns. People don't draw on it for them. They don't have anything to look at it. They create it out of their imaginations. And then some entrepreneur, brought it across the country and across the sea to this country, and because they were made by less fortunate people than us, they charged very minimal amounts of money. And sometimes you're even a little upset that you have to pay $100 for a garment that's worth tens of thousands, right? So my goal in life is to maybe just educate all of us a little bit about the craftsmanship and the passion and the ingenuity that goes into these projects. And then we have Where Women Cook, which is all about the foodie. And this is, we feature there are a lot of foodies on Instagram. So instead of paying influencers to produce our products or to sell our products, we actually feature them in the magazines and let them tell their own stories. So, and it's been very, very popular for us. And then Where Women Work is the small entrepreneur. It's not the chain restaurant owner. It's not the most fabulous restaurant in New York. It's the pancake house on the corner that the mom and dad have owned for 40 years and the kids are taking over. Or it's the small retail store in the middle of your city that's really struggling because people are buying almost everything online these days. And I think one of the reasons, if you don't know about us, you don't know about us. If you're not in our category, you've never heard about our magazines because our magazines are very niche. But our audience is big and it's passionate and it's committed. So when we're not always in Costco because as an independent publisher we can't afford the prices for the. Do you all know that when you are a magazine that whenever you're in a store you have to pay for your space, and the more premium the space, the more money you have to pay. So we're in there sometimes, but when Where Women Create is in Costco, we're the highest grossing magazine on the shelf. So we do really, really well, and we are number 2 or number 3 in Barnes & Noble in our category. So you've never heard of us, but those people, it's like sailing. If you're not a sailor, you don't know the top sailing magazines in the country, right? So that's what we do, and I'm going to tell you a little story because I started in publishing about 43 years ago, and I owned a retail store that sold arts and crafts supplies to the university, and at that time, counted cross stitch came into America. Jenny Thompson brought it over from Europe, and it hit America with a vengeance. Now, you're all way too young to know that, and that was literally 43 years ago, but it exploded. And so I owned a retail store, and I decided there was more money in wholesaling than retailing, and that was the hottest topic in the crafting world in those days, and so that we would do books. And they were 24 pages, all black and white, color covers. They sold for $4.95. Okay, so at that time, we could sell millions. The numbers sound like they're exaggerated, but they really weren't. We would produce 6 new cross-stitch leaflets every 6 weeks, and we would sell 4 to 5 million at a time. We would go to trade shows and we would write $500,000 worth of orders in counted cross-stitch. And everybody would say, oh, my grandma used to do counted cross-stitch, right? And we would tell everybody our numbers, and everybody would roll their eyes, because if you didn't do counted cross-stitch, you didn't understand how passionate the category was and how many people were actually doing handcrafts. So I had a big warehouse. I had 25 employees. We were shipping millions of books. Life could never be better. But in the very beginning, whenever I think of myself as an entrepreneur who focuses on the printed page. I don't look at myself as a publisher so much. Like all of the people we've heard speak today and last night have come up through the ranks. They've worked for publisher houses, they've worked for different publishers, they've gone through different stages of publishing. I just am an entrepreneur who had a great idea and decided that we should do cross-stitch books because we were selling so many of them in our retail store, and I thought I could make more money as an entrepreneur, right? So, but when you're brand new, when you're an entrepreneur and when you're brand new, regardless of how popular a category is, you have to get your name out there. And in those days, it was print, and it was Women's Day was the big one. Do you even know who Women's Day is? But in those days, Women's Day was the women's magazine. Everybody wanted to be in Women's Day, right? So as a very successful cross-stitch craft publisher, I got to be friends with all the editors of the magazine. So the editor of the magazine from Women's Day called me one day. It was like in February, and she said, "Jo, Women's Day's going to do a story on crafters at Christmas. Will you be one of them?" And I said, "Well, sure. I mean, I'd been in business for like 8 months. We needed all the press we could get. I was thrilled to do it." And she said, "Would you send me your Christmas ornaments?" And she said, "Do you make them?" And I said, "Yeah, actually I did. I actually do make them." And she said, "Will you send them to me?" So I said, "Sure." So I boxed them all up, got them out of storage, boxed them all up, sent them to her. She called me up and she said, "We really don't like your Christmas ornaments. It's not exactly the perspective that we had on your part of the story." And she said, "Would you mind if our art team remade the Christmas ornaments?" And I'm thinking, well, I'll do anything to get a little publicity, right? I mean, it's not too dishonest because I could do it. So they made the Christmas ornaments, and then she called me up and she said, "Okay, we're sending the Christmas ornaments back today." And this is June, right? Because you had to photograph in June so you could do your Christmas issue, so you could meet your deadlines. And she said, "We're going to send the Christmas ornaments back, and when you take the photographs, we want to make sure your entire family is in the photographs because it's a family Christmas." And I said, "Sure, we'll all be there." And she said, "Your whole family?" And I said, "Yeah, my whole family." And she goes, "No, everybody in your family." And I said, "Well, that would be me and my son and my daughter, who were young. I mean, they were like 4 and 2. And she said, "But we need your husband in there. We need a whole family." And I said, "But I'm divorced." And she said, "Do you think he would come over and be part of the picture?" And so I happen to have a really good relationship with my ex-husband. So I called him up and said, "Scott, would you come and be part of this family Christmas that is going to be in Women's Day?" And he said, "Sure." So I still have that photograph on the wall in my study. And so they send back these ornaments that didn't look anything like me, right? I live in Utah, we're mountain country, and it was a seaside theme. There were seashells and seahorses, and they were all glitzed up and had sequins, which is so not me. And so, but I decorated the tree, we did the whole thing, we took the pictures, Scott came over, the kids were there, and I'm not sure how other magazines work today, but in those days you never got to read your article, you never got to proof it or see what it said. And so in November, when Women's Day was supposed to hit the newsstands, of course we were going every day to see what would happen. And when it finally hit the newsstands, I buy every one, right? And I pick them up and I get in the car and I open it up to my article, and the articles were written like a letter. They were supposed to be a letter to the readers of Women's Day that said, "This is my family Christmas, and this is how we celebrate, and this is what we do." So I opened it up, and there's the picture of a family that's not really my family anymore. And there's the picture of a Christmas tree that has never been my Christmas tree. And there's a letter that I kind of wrote, but the editor got a hold of it and didn't think the grammar was right, and that it didn't express what I was trying to say exactly the way I was trying to say it. So she rewrote it for me, and then there was somebody else's signature. And so I called the editor and said, this doesn't look exactly like we started. And I said, what happened to my signature? And she goes, well, the editor in charge of that article really didn't like the way you wrote your names. So on that day, at that moment in time, I promised myself that if I ever had the opportunity to publish my own magazine, that it would be truly authentic, that there would be no editors correcting the copy, that there would be nobody else choosing what should be in my photography, that there would be nobody creating a life that I don't live and never really wanted to, right? And so from like everything when you're an entrepreneur, cross stitch was selling like crazy. We were making tens of millions of dollars. Life was really great. We were this 2 young mothers in Ogden, Utah, kicking ass. And then the accountant came in one day and he said, your sales have fallen 85% in 30 days. And it was over. It's just like one of those trends that it goes like this, and it doesn't slope off, it just ends. And it happened to the entire craft industry. When I started doing cross-stitch books, there were 5 of us. When I finished, there were 5,000 of us. So the pie didn't get any bigger. There were just more creators, and then the pieces to the pie got smaller, and then everybody had so much pie that they didn't want to eat any more pie, so they just quit buying cross-stitch books. And that was the time when women went back to work and the physical fitness craze hit. So instead of sitting home doing cross-stitch, all these women that had enough cross-stitch patterns to last them 10 lifetimes just stopped. They just stopped buying, and it was over. And it was ugly. And we had a huge machine and lots of money. We had big warehouses. And you can imagine shipping 1 million books every 2 or 3 months for a small company, what that looks like, right? And so I went to Better Homes and Gardens, Stephen. I had a friend who was an editor of the books of Better Homes and Gardens, and I called her and said, this is when being an entrepreneur is an asset and a detriment because you don't know what you don't know. And I'm from a small town, right? So I really didn't know what I didn't know. And I was in cross-stitch, which is not a big category in the world as a whole. So I called the editor that we'd gotten to be really good friends with, and I said, I would like to meet with the president of Barnes & Noble. And she goes, nobody meets with the president, or not Barnes & Noble, Better Homes and Gardens. She said, nobody meets with the president of Barnes & Noble. And I said, no, I really want to. I've got a great idea. I think you guys need to listen. And she goes, tell me. And I said, no, I want to tell the president. And so he was going to be in New York from Des Moines at that. This is 35 years ago, right? So he was going to be in Des Moines, or in New York from Des Moines. And so I flew in, and I went into the boardroom, and it was like everything I'd seen in the movies, right? It was this great big wood table with all these men sitting around, and I walked in the door with my little cross-stitch books and my little linen suit from Utah, and I said, would you please excuse me just for 5 minutes? And I went in the bathroom and threw my guts up. I was so scared I could hardly talk, right? So I went in and I made my little presentation, which my idea was, in those days when the big publishers did craft books, if you knitted Afghans, you would take your Afghan to the editor at Better Homes and Gardens, and you would put it on the editor's desk, and she would write it and photograph it, and they'd send you a royalty if you made one. And it took 2 years to get it to press, right? So so I go in and show him my books, and he goes, yeah, this is a waste of time. This is really nice. But he was very gentlemanly, very professional. And he said, what's your idea? And I said, we can produce cross-stitch books for you, craft books of all natures, in half the time for half the money. And he said, no. And he goes to fold up all his stuff, and I said, what do you mean, no? And he goes, no. And I said, well, why no? And he said, because that's not the way we do it here. And I said, well, why don't you do it that way? Here it would be cheaper and faster, and you could be more Your content could be more timely. I mean, there's no reason why you shouldn't do that. And he said, no, well, my whole company had just crashed and I needed a job, right? And so I said I had nothing to lose. So I said to him, I'll make you a deal. And he said, what? And I said, you let me produce a counted cross-stitch book, hardbound counted cross-stitch book. I'll pick the subject. You tell me how many copies it needs to sell to be a success. And I'll do it for free. And if I can sell that many copies in a legitimate amount of time, then you have to pay me you have to cover my costs, you have to pay me triple the royalty, and you have to give me a 5-year contract. Well, he laughed right out loud, right? He was like, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And so he said, okay, so you have to remember that my whole company had folded, so I didn't have a team. I didn't have a staff to produce a hardbound cross-stitch book. So I called all my friends who do cross-stitch and said, this is what we're going to do. I need you guys to design this many. You guys are going to stitch this many. I'm going to actually graph them. They're going to put it together in book form, and we're going to deliver it. And we have 4.5 months. And so it was I'll never forget, I still have it. It was 365 5-minute cross-stitch projects, and one for every day. It was beautifully done, and I think Meredith sold a little over 500,000. And so that set me off on my hardbound book career. So I worked with Meredith in Oxmoor House for a couple of years, and then I got a really good opportunity to work with Sterling Publishing, who wanted us to build his brand of craft books. And so I had a great 17-year run there. I mean, Lincoln Bohm owned it in those days. I don't do really well with corporate scares me just a little bit. They're just too big, and the people who make the decisions sometimes don't always understand what's going on the street. They're looking at the numbers, and guys are trying to make decisions about what women want in cross-stitch. And, I wanted to do a book on designing laundry rooms, and I got laughed right out of the boardroom because, were they going to go down to the basement in their co-op, their apartment co-op, and design the laundry room because they're all in New York and that's all they knew, right? Nobody had their own private laundry room. So, so there were a few battles going on. So when I went to work for Sterling, Lincoln said to me, I will pay all of your bills and you can produce as many books a year as you want. You fly in once a month, you tell me how many you want to produce, I'll pay the bills, we'll get them sold, it's all yours. So when we started with about 10. When that gig was over, 17 years later, we were producing about 100 craft books a year. We were anything that you needed instructions to do. Gardening, home decorating, master woodworking, anything we would produce. That's one hardbound book every 3 days. So I had another huge staff that built way back up, had 3 big buildings, our own photography studio. And as an entrepreneur, you're always trying to find ways to make things work together to cut your costs because we don't have corporate financing, right? So when we started doing 100 books a year and I owned 3 buildings in Ogden, Utah, my daughter had come to work with me and she hated publishing. And she doesn't hate to read. She just hated the back end of producing it. It wasn't exciting enough for her. And so she said to me, Mom, I'll open 3 retail stores because she loves retail. And I owned 3 buildings, and she said, I'll open a retail store in our historic district in the bottom of each building, which worked really well because the photography studio was across the street, and we would spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on photo props because we did all the photography for all the books in our photography studio. We would fly in the artists, we'd fly in their projects, we'd shoot it all, and then we'd lay it out. Well, when Sarah opened the stores, then we could buy the inventory for the stores, we could photograph it at night in the stores with the displays, and then we could sell the product so that instead of spending $500,000 a year on photography, we had a positive income flow from the stores. So as an entrepreneur, you find ways to make all of that pay for itself because you don't have any place to go for a budget. So that lasted 17 years. It was a fabulous run, and life was really good. Then on Christmas Eve, I got a call from Lincoln had sold Sterling to Barnes & Noble, and I got a call from the president of Lincoln, the president of Sterling. Had nothing to do with Barnes & Noble. I want to say that right out loud, because my biggest nightmare in life is that Barnes & Noble will file bankruptcy, and then there will be a lot of us out of business. So, but I got a call from the president of Sterling, and he said, we're trying to decide what we want to do, and we're changing our direction, and we're stopping everything in midstream. There will be no more royalties paid. There will be no more books done. When you're doing 100 books a year, you're actually doing 300, because you're getting 100 out the door, you're working on 100, and you've started compiling this 100. So you're actually working on 100. And he said, nope, no more money, no more advances, no more anything. So, of course, I went to a lawyer, and I said, through my tears and my hysteria, what am I going to do? And he said, they can't do this, right? Sterling cannot do this to you. So you have to continue to adhere to the terms of your contract, so they can't say that you've breached it. And you have to continue to deliver the books, and we'll work it out legally. Right? And it'll be fine, and then they'll owe you back wages, and you'll just keep going. And I was naive enough to believe that. Right? So we worked on it about 3.5 years. I lost everything. Everything. I had dinner with my dad every single night, because between the legal fees, and we sold all but one of the buildings, and I had to continue to pay the royalty to the authors who had written books 5 years ago, because Sterling had frozen everything. And so I decided to get a job at Starbucks. I decided publishing probably wasn't for me. It probably, the printed page probably didn't have the same allure for me that it had always had. So I actually went and got a job at Starbucks. Now, I never did work at Starbucks, but they did hire me, and I was getting ready for my training, and a really good friend of mine who lives in California, whose books we'd all written and everything, said to me, come down, and our big trade show was CHA, the Craft Hobby Association trade show. And she said, we'll go to CHA, we'll see who's hiring, we'll get you a job. And I said, yeah, I don't really want a job. I'm going to go to work at Starbucks. It works for me. But through the whole thing, there's a company called Stampington, who probably none of you have ever heard of, but is one of the most successful independent publishers of women's magazines in the country. Colleen has about 36 magazines. They're all targeted towards crafts. She does amazing work. They're all heavy paper, nice covers, 160 pages. So my friend talked me into calling her up, and so I do my homework. I really do my homework. And so I went online. Computers had just started. In those days, we had our first big computer, right? So I went online, and I looked up Stampington, and the editor-in-chief's name was Jenny Doe. And so I sent her an email and introduced myself and said, this is who I am, and I'm coming down, and I'd like to meet with you. And Jenny is a genius, but she is all business and all deadlines, and she produced 36 magazines by herself. She had a team, but she was the editor-in-chief of 36 magazines, right? So she just writes me back this little note that says, we don't do books. And I'm thinking, that's not a professional way to do that, right? So I write her back and say, I don't want to do books with you. And she says, what do you want to do? And I write back and say, Sandra says that we should meet. We've never met. We're in the same industry. I just want to come down. So she says, the trade show starts Friday. You can come in Thursday. I'll give you 45 minutes. Okay. So I fly in. My son picks me up at the airport. I make him drop me off at the corner because I feel like a junior high school kid who doesn't want his mother to take her to school, right? And I'm like, if my son has to pick me up and drop me off. Now, that's what happens when you're down. If you're up, the scenario is, oh, my son lives here, and he came and picked me up at the airport, and he's bringing me to work, right? But when you have nothing, you think the whole world knows you have nothing, right? So Jenny comes out of Stampington's offices. She introduces herself. She says to me, Kelleen's going to go to lunch with us. And I had never seen Kelleen's name. Wasn't on the website, wasn't in any of the magazines, wasn't anywhere. So I thought she was her assistant. So I said, great. So I'm watching my watch. I've got 45 minutes. I'm terrified they're going to want me to pay for lunch. You know, I'm just like, what in the hell have I done now? So we're sitting at lunch, and I said, after about 10 minutes, I said, who owns Stampington? And Kelleen's kind of this slight, quiet woman, kind of almost a recluse, and she says, I do. Oh, hi. And so it was so awkward. So I went to introduce myself, and she said, I know who you are. And I said, you do? And she said, I have your book, Where Women Create, which was one of the last books that I had produced for Sterling right before the bottom fell out. And she said, it's my very favorite book. Would you consider doing a series of magazines? Well, I had to think about it for about 2.5 seconds. And then I said, you know, sure. And she said, okay, I'll own it and pay your royalty. Well, in the lawsuit with Sterling, what had happened was, when you get so far down and you're so scared and you're in a position, we were in New York with at the New York offices with all the lawyers, and my lawyer was there, and we had about, Where Women Creates an imprint, we had about 150 imprints. And the Sterling lawyer said, we own all those imprints. And my lawyer said, no, you don't. And they said, you will win this case. You really will win this case, but we will drag it out for 10 years and cost you $10 million to win it. Well, I was out, right? I was living with my dad. And so in my defiant last stand, I said, you can't have Where Women Create. I mean, out of all 150, and I had one book under that, and he looks at me like, you can't have it, we're going to take them all. And I said, nope, if you take Where Women Create, we're going to go to the mat. I'm going to fight this to the very end, as if I really was going to. But I was so desperate, and you have to hold on to some thread of dignity. I mean, you really do. And so so the lawyer said, one of the lawyers, they had a lot of lawyers, so one of the lawyers said, oh, give it to her, it just doesn't matter. So when I was sitting there with Kelleen, it was the only thing I owned in my life was the imprint and the trademark on one title, which was Where Women Create. And when she wanted to own it, I'm like, yeah, no, that's not going to work for me. So she said, okay, you design it, you produce it, or you get all the people, you write the stories, we'll publish it and sell it, and we'll split it. And I said, okay. And so we shake hands, we go back to her offices, we make 6-foot posters, we go to the CHA show in the morning, and we announce the launch of Where Women Create the magazine. And so we started working on it. I went home, again asking my team. I went to all my friends, my 12 top friends in the industry, and said, you guys, I'm going to launch a magazine, and I don't have any editors, and I can't afford to pay for the photography. And I told them the story about Women's Day, and I said, so I want you to write your own story, and I want you to take your own photography, and we're going to publish it. And they all said yes. And so the designer who'd worked for me before said he would lay it out for free, and we could pay him after we sold the first issues of magazines. What I didn't know was that Kelleen's business model was you didn't get paid for a year, because in the magazine industry, you don't get your final numbers until a year is up. So I had to produce 3 more because it was a quarterly magazine. So my friends, this is why community is so important. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a publisher, I don't care what you do, your community and taking advantage of the resources that you have now. I think after everything that's happened to me in my life, the one regret I have is that when I was in college and every single person around me wanted me to be a success, all of my teachers, all of the people I worked with, everybody everywhere want you to succeed. They will do everything they can to help you, and I didn't take advantage of that. You know, I think I would have been a lot further ahead if I had. But, you know, because I'm an entrepreneur, because I've built a community of women who don't do it for the money, the people that we feature, you will never hear of and you will never remember. But they do it for the passion and the love of their craft and their art. And we still do it. I correct their spelling. But if you read the stories in my magazines, we have no editor. I feel like you write the way you speak. And I talk in long run-on sentences with 1,000,000 exclamation points. And that's the way I write. And I don't want any editor cutting it up into sentences and putting periods after it, because then you can't tell who I am. It should sound like we're sitting here having a conversation. So that's the way my magazines are written. They choose their own photography, they write their own features. Every single person has to sign off on their article before we go to press, so that no one who's ever featured in any of my magazines hates their article. Because if you've ever, my experience with the magazine, and if you've ever been in the newspaper, you always say, now why did they pick that picture? I hate that picture, right? And I don't know what I said that made them think I said that, but I didn't really say that, right? And so I think it's why we're so successful and our audience is so engaged and so passionate. So I guess my final statement is, take advantage of your resources, build yourself a really tight-knit community. Don't trust everybody, because not everybody has your best interest at heart. Be very selective, build yourself a community, and do what you're passionate about. Do not waste your valuable time doing something that you don't care about. So thank you for reading my magazines. Thank you for Samir. You have no idea what an honor this is for me, for Samir to invite me. I really do feel like the little girl in the group, even though I'm the oldest. I could be your grandmother. But, and I appreciate you coming. It's a beautiful day outside. You guys could be doing a lot of things. So, and the other people that spoke, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.